Howdy. In this video, I'll be covering the theory behind variables in the Apex programming language, and you'll even get a chance to get hands-on practice declaring your own variables and getting instant feedback using campapex.org. To do that, let me show you how this video ends. It's going to end with me declaring some variables for you. You'll watch me declare these, walk you through my thought process, and we'll actually debug these values and see what they look like in the developer console. Next, we will look at 31 different hands-on challenges that we can solve on our own and get instant feedback to confirm we're declaring variables correctly. This is real practice. And then we can go through the lessons that are available on campapex.org that introduce you to variables, data types, and everything in between while giving you more hands-on experience actually declaring those variables. To get there, we'll start with the theory. I'll give you an introduction to variables, what they are, and how they work. Then you'll get to watch me declare some variables and walk you through my thought process as I'm doing so. And then lastly, you'll get a chance to get hands-on. This is time for you to take the theory that you learned about and apply it in the real world and get real hands-on experience declaring variables. There's currently over 30 practice problems for you to solve in the site. Variables are a way for you to store, reference, and manipulate data in a computer program. Software transforms data. It converts an input into an output. To do that, we have to use variables within our programs to keep track of the data we're referencing and manipulating. Do you remember in math class we learned to balance equations and use variables to reference numbers? X equals 1 as an example. Well, in code and in Apex, we can do that too. Except we can also use variables to reference words, and we can use variables to reference some binary state like true and false. Think about it like a box. Specifically, a moving box. When you're moving, you're packing many boxes. It might be helpful to put a label on the box. So you give it a label, but of course you don't want that label to be blank, so you give it a name. Well, try to think about it in the context of Salesforce. We don't have office supplies, but we might have an opportunity amount. Now, an empty box isn't going to do you any good, so you want to put some data in there. You'll take that data and put it inside the box. There you go. Just like that, you created a box, you gave it a name, and you put data inside of it. That's how variables work in Apex. Now, that worked out really well, but is it going to work for everything? Say you're unpacking your boxes after you move, and you see a box named Opportunity End Date, and you open it up to see the phrase Stage 10. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You were expecting a date, but you found words. So you open up another box. This one's called Stage Name. You're expecting to see a word, but instead, you see a Boolean state like true. You start getting nervous. Here's the thing. The data must match the data type. So let's get organized. We already have a brown box. Let's create a rule while we're packing and saying that brown boxes can only store whole numbers. We see some blue boxes laying around, so we create another rule that says blue boxes can only hold phrases or words. And let's say we find a red box too, and create a rule that says red boxes can only store decimal values, so like 1.5. We see some purple boxes laying around. We still have some binary state, so we create a rule that says purple boxes can only hold binary state like true and false. That guarantees that whenever we open up this box, we can see the data that we expect, and we're in a much better place. Brown boxes hold whole numbers, blue boxes hold words, purple boxes hold Booleans, and red boxes store decimals. Now, Apex has rules just like this built into the language. They're enforced with this thing called data types, more specifically primitive data types. So instead of what we saw with just x equals 1, in Apex we have to declare a data type in order to declare a variable. In this case with x equals 1, 1's a whole number. Whole numbers in Apex are represented by the data type integer. So we'll declare the data type along with the variable and the assignment. Instead of just y equals howdy, we know howdy is a word or a phrase. Those are represented by strings in Apex, so we'll call the string y is equal to howdy. And lastly, z equals true. Those types of binary states in Apex are handled by the data type Boolean. So diving a little deeper here and looking at howdy, for example, string is the data type. You can think of that as the colored box that defines what type of data it can store. Y is the variable. You can think of that as the label for the box. And howdy, wrapped in single quotes, is the data. That's what goes inside of the box. This variable syntax is actually split in two. The data type and the variable make up what we call a declaration of a variable, and the assignment operator, otherwise known as the equal sign, and the data itself, howdy, represent the initialization of that variable. In other words, it represents data going into the variable. But the syntax is not complete. I forgot one thing, the semicolon. The semicolon is a delimiter. It signifies the end of a statement. It's what allows us to write multiple lines of code, one after another. It behaves just the same as a period or some other punctuation mark does in a written language. Once we have the semicolon in place, all the way from the data type to the semicolon, the whole thing comes together as a statement. For a better visual of this, we can refer back to our box analogy. Think about it like this. The blue box represents the data type string, the label represents the variable y, and howdy is the data that goes inside the box. This visual really highlights how silly it is to call the box y. That name isn't very descriptive. When I'm looking at all the boxes, it's going to be hard for me to remember what's inside of y. So renaming this to greeting, for example, makes the intent of the variable, or the box, a lot more clear for ourselves and other people who might be unpacking boxes on our behalf. We limit confusion about what's actually being stored inside. It's really important to name variables appropriately so you know what's inside them. Let's go through all the data types available in Apex. And remember, those are like all those different colored boxes, except there's a lot of them in Apex. But we'll go through each one by one. The first one you've seen a few times now, it's a string. Strings represent a sequence of characters. They hold words or phrases. Within the string, it has to be wrapped in quotes at either side and followed with a semicolon. The next data type is an integer. They represent positive or negative whole numbers. Now you can't just put any number in there. It has to be within the range that's denoted there. An example of that is an integer called days till close that holds the whole number 5. Now, when you have numbers that need to be bigger and outside of that range, that's where long comes in. Those hold really big positive and negative whole numbers. An example of that could be if you wanted to get the current time, but in milliseconds. That's going to be a number that's outside of the range of an integer, so you'd reach for long in that case. The next data type you've seen a couple times too. Booleans help us store binary state like true and false. An example of that could be a Boolean called is opportunity closed that's set to true. The next data type is called date. It helps us represent an exact day in the calendar. An example of that is renewal date. We do have to use this syntax for declaring a date using the date class and the new instance method to pass in the year, the month, and the actual day. And we'll get into classes and methods in a different video. Another data type is called date time. That represents an exact day and time. So here we've declared a variable of type data type named follow-up and assigned it a specific day and a specific time on that day. Up next, we have time. It helps represent an exact time within the day. Here we've declared a variable called rescheduled for of the type time and used time new instance to assign it 1230. Then we have decimals. These are fixed size numbers with customizable decimal places, and that's called scale. We get into a lot more detail within the actual lesson on Camp Apex there. Next up, we have doubles. That's another form of a decimal that holds larger fixed size numbers. An example of that could be if we needed to store the latitude. And the courses on Camp Apex get into a whole lot of detail explaining the differences of when you'd want to use each. And lastly, we have the ID data type that helps us hold a 18-character Salesforce ID or the record identifier. An example of that here is with user ID, which we're using to store some user's ID so we can use or process it later in our code. And that's it. Those are all the data types in Apex. I lied. There's one more. That last data type is called object. That's the data type of data types. It can store any other data type it wants, like strings, whole numbers, decimals, objects, custom classes, you name it. Using our box analogy, you can think of it like a multi-purpose rainbow box that can be anything it wants. And if that didn't help, maybe this will. Or this. Or this. Oh, right. There's one more data type, but it's called blob, and no one really talks about blob, so let's move on. All right, we made it to part 2. Let me show you how I would declare some variables. All right, so to do that, go to campapex.org and hop on to the login button, and we're gonna authorize a Trailhead org. Do that, I have my hands-on orgs on Trailhead ready to go. I'll just launch that. Once it's open and I'm logged in, I'll come back to Camp Apex and hit this connect button, and that'll automatically log me into that Salesforce org so I can start challenges. So what we'll do is we'll declare some variables. I'll go ahead and create an integer. To do that, I have to declare the data type integer, and I have to give this variable a name. Let's say we want to keep track of the number of days till an opportunity closes. So I'll come up with a descriptive variable name like days till close, and I'll assign it a value. Let's say it closes in 10 days. Now what's cool about this UI is I can use system.debug to actually print out the data that's inside this variable. To do that, I'll call system.debug and I'll pass in that variable. Now what'll happen is in this UI, once I hit the run button, it'll go in and it'll see that days till close is assigned the value 10, and it'll print out 10 to that window. I can change this. I can go ahead and change it to 20 and run again. That'll print out 20 this time. Now, one thing that I didn't touch on in the video earlier was that variables don't need to be initialized as soon as they're declared. Those can be two independent statements. So for example, with days to close, I could just go ahead and not assign it to 20. Now what happens is when you leave it unassigned, or I should say uninitialized, Apex comes in and automatically says that this variable is assigned to null. Null is kind of like the absence of data. It's a little bit different than empty data. It's really just void of any data at all. Null is like having a TV remote that isn't paired to any TV, whereas empty is more like having a TV that's turned on but it's showing a blank screen. Hopefully that difference makes sense. Now what happens is if I debug days till close as is, I'm going to see that null value. Again, that's not data, that's the absence of data every time we see null. What's great here is that variables can be reassigned after they're declared. So I could take days till close again, and now I can give it the value of 10. And if I print it one more time, first time I should see null, second time I should see 10. Let's see if that's the case. Cool. And I can just keep going, do this as many times as I need. Now what we'll eventually see in the next video and in the expression operators and assignments course is that we can actually manipulate this data. So I can take days till close and I can reassign it to say days till close plus 20. What that does is that it'll look at the current value being stored in this variable, which is 20, and add 20 to it. So then I can take my debug, and this time I should get 40. So I'll get null, 10, 20, 40. So now let's go ahead and declare a string. Let's say I want to store howdy like I did earlier. I'll declare the data type string. I'll declare a name like greeting. That'll be my variable name. And I'll assign it a value like howdy. End it with a semicolon. Now if I just hit run right now, everything works, but nothing gets printed out to the debug. So I'll have to come in with my system.debug and print out greeting. And just like we showed with numbers, the same type of data manipulation is possible with strings as well. For now, I'll give you a little sneak peek. I can take greeting and I can add another string to it. So I can add the string howdy from Camp Apex. And that will concatenate the word howdy with the phrase from Camp Apex and print it out to the debug console. Very cool. And I can do that outside the variable too. I can say greeting is equal to, let me get rid of this, is equal to greeting plus from Camp Apex. I can print that out. Should see that again, howdy from Camp Apex. Now, if I wanted to clear this data, I could do that in a couple ways. I could set greeting to a blank string. And when I print that out, should see these two and then the blank string. There it is, it's empty. And again, that's different from null. So if I came in here and I assigned this guy to null, I could do so explicitly as well after the variable has been declared and initialized. There you go. Now, the focus of this video is not on all of these things like empty strings, nulls, concatenations, but I just want to give you a little bit of a preview into what's to come to help you understand the real impact that variables are going to have in your software. This is what I mean by variables are used to manipulate data. Let's do one more. Let's declare a Boolean together. These hold binary state, so I'll come up with a variable called like is closed, for example. Set that to true. System.debug is closed. Let me actually get a refresh here. I should see true printed out. And again, just like we did earlier, I can take that, mark it as false, and print it out again. Perfect. What I can't do though is within a single piece of code, I can't declare a variable twice with the same name. So here what's going on as is I have a Boolean variable called isClosed set to true, and then here I'm reassigning it to isClosed. I'm reassigning isClosed to false. What I can't do is this. What this is saying is, hey, declare a new variable called isClosed of type Boolean. Doesn't matter what happens after it. And then later it comes down here, it says, hey, okay, go ahead and declare another variable called isClosed of type Boolean. The Apex compiler is going to get confused. It's not going to be able to keep track of which is which because they're both Booleans and they're both named the same thing. So what you do to get around this, if I try to run this as is, I get back this error, right? It says duplicate field is closed. What I could do is I could name this variable differently. So I could call it like isClosed1, isClosed2, isClosed dupe, whatever you want. And that'll get over that error. I should be able to print both true and false. So that's me showing you. Now it's your turn. I have two resources available for you. Let me show you both. The first one is on Camp Apex under the Learn tab. There's a whole bunch of content on there that gives you lessons and hands-on experience. What you'll want to do for this course is reference this data type and variables course. In there, we have lessons dedicated to teaching you more in depth about variables and the different data types that you need to interact with. Each one has a lesson followed with a coding challenge that you can solve on your own. In this one, starting off simple, just uncomment the line to declare your first variable. Going along with that, hit run, test passed. And we do that for every data type. There's one for integer where you'll declare your own integer. You'll do it for a decimal. You'll do it for a Boolean, etc., etc. This is a great way for you to balance the theory with hands-on experience. Now, once you go through this course, you might feel like you need more practice, right? I got you covered. If you go over to the practice tab, there's a course out there right now for variables specifically. In there, I have over 30 practice problems that you can solve to get hands-on experience solving and declaring variables. I'll work through this first one with you. The prompt is declare a string variable named message and set it to hello world. Use system.debug to display its value. And the cool part is that you get instant feedback. You don't have to do this on your own. So I'm going to declare a string called message, and I'm going to set it to the value hello world. Make sure to end it with a semicolon. When I hit run test, it's going to validate my code for me. So the first thing it did is it validated that a message variable was declared. Cool. Second thing it validated was that I assigned that variable correctly. So it expected hello world and it received hello world. Perfect. The third scenario failed. It wanted me to print that value out to the console, right? So I could actually see it and get a visual. Right now, I don't have anything printed to the console. So what I'll do is, like I did before, system.debug, print out message, end it with a semicolon, and let me rerun my tests. Perfect, they all passed. It validated that I got it printed out, and I can even go to this debug console and look at that data that I entered. There's 31 of these. We cover integers, decimals, doubles, longs, dates, date times, you name it, we have it covered here. This is a great way for you to get hands-on experience. Don't let your learning stop with just YouTube videos, guys. Get hands-on experience. Check out courses to get an introduction on top of this video on variables and data types, and then check out the over 30 practice problems available right now. On a serious note, you guys, good luck. I hope Camp Apex helps you reach your goals. And on an unserious note, thank you for watching.